Welcome back to the third and final part of this three-video series cataloging all of the image matches in the Roanoke cask painting, painting number 3 from the book The Secret, A Treasure Hunt by Byron Preiss. And it only took me 5 years. Sorry about that. I'm especially thrilled to finish this series because, according to an interview with the artist behind The Secret, John Jude Palikar, the first 3 puzzles that were solved in the same order in which he painted them. So, can you guess which painting he said was next? That's right, this one, image number 3. So, I guess that means this will be the next cast to be found. And to help you do it, I'm going to cover some of the more fun aspects of the painting, from the cracks in the walls to the mysterious items hanging from the arms of the knight. But before we continue, I first have an update from the last video. In part 2, I discussed these odd highlights on the belly of the knight. I suggested these could be anything from an astrolabe to a baseball diamond. I now believe they're associated with the walkways around Wright Brothers Memorial on the Outer Banks. In this picture here, you can see the distinctive shapes of these pathways and the clear resemblance to the highlighting of the knight's armor. Also, from part 2, I discussed the cross in the upper left of the armor on the chest of the knight. I suggested this could be a reference to the area of the Mount Imwellhead in the Ozabeacon Gardens. I have since come to understand 2 other, more plausible explanations. The first is a stone bench within the gardens. When you zoom in on the design on the bench, you can see a very similar design as the cross on the breastplate. The picture and the weathering of the stone make it a little hard to tell, but it's very, very close in resemblance. So, where is this bench exactly? Well, a few years ago, I went back to the gardens to look for it, and here it is. It's located around the outside corner loop. You'd walk left from the entrance to get there. It looks like it's been there for quite some time, but there's no way to tell for sure. Unless someone has knowledge or pictures from the 1980s, it may not be possible to know whether this bench is still sitting in the same location as when Byron buried the cask. I noticed that the bench had a name as indicated on the map. The name of the bench is Bennett's Bench. Now, there was a Bennett who was part of the original colony at Roanoke, but the name is spelled differently. After a little detective work, I found that there was someone who served as chairperson of the gardens from 1959 to 1964, but the same last name, this time spelled the exact same. So I think it's reasonable to assume this bench is named after that person. I will leave it to all of you to figure out whether that's significant. But as good as that connection is, there's another explanation that I think is even better. I'm going to give credit to Kendall Kruger for coming up with this gem, which he stumbled upon while riding his bike around an airfield. Pads set into the ground for tying down aircraft. I've always been skeptical of the far-fetched explanations folks have provided for these shapes on the breastplate, but these pictures make a pretty convincing case of what they actually are. I think this one is a slam dunk. And on that note, now would be a good time to revisit my rating system to rate potential matches in the painting. Slam dunk means it feels like an excellent fit with the painting and the context. An educated guess is a logical fit, but not as confident as a slam dunk. And something rated pure speculation is, as the name implies, purely speculative. Okay, so let's get started. The first area we're going to examine is the area below the armor on the knight. Here we have what I will call, for lack of a better name, the red skirt. This one stumped me when I first started looking into the image, and it wasn't until I actually visited Roanoke that I came up with a good theory. Walking around Roanoke, and in fact the entire Outer Banks, there are green leafy plants that naturally grow all around the coastline. These are green yucca plants. Color aside, there is a clear resemblance to the texture of the red skirt of the knight. What makes this explanation even more compelling is this picture here. This picture is believed to be of a sign that at one time existed on the Harriet Trail. The Harriet Trail is a featured trail within Port Raleigh Park, named after Thomas Harriot, an English scientist who was part of the Roanoke expedition. The sign, which may or may not have been around at the time Byron buried the cask, clearly mentions yucca plants, and specifically their use as clothing. Now, the problem with this explanation is the color red. Yucca plants aren't red, so I'm only rating this one as an educated guess. So why is this skirt red? One idea is that it's a throwback to English slops. In these period pictures, you can see the flourishing red pants of the English colonists, and I believe Palancar geniusly combined these red English slops with the dated yucca plants to create the red skirt of the knight. But another idea is that these are tobacco leaves. This would be a great camp at North Carolina as the location of the cask, since North Carolina is the country's leading producer of tobacco. In fact, North Carolina led the country in tobacco production since the late 19th century. Like the yucca plant, tobacco is also green, but when it dries out, it does turn a brownish shade of red. So Personally, it could be either the yucca plant or tobacco, but I like the yucca plant explanation a little bit better. But there's more to this red skirt. The direction of the leaves stands out. And as it turns out, there appears to be an explanation for that. If you look at a map of the southern end of Roanoke Island, you can see an uncanny resemblance between the directions of the roads and the leaves in the skirt. This could be just a coincidence, but I think it's more likely a subtle clue. We know that Byron relied on maps in these puzzles, so I rate this one as an educated guess. Behind the red skirt of the knight, you'll notice a lot of straight lines and crazy shapes. I'm convinced there's something more going on here that no one has yet figured out, but there is one thing denoted by the yellow arrow here. Here's a close up. At first glance, it just looks like a straight leaf from the skirt. But when you look at maps of the area, specifically a map of the Wright Brothers Memorial, you can see a clear resemblance. If you take the map of the grounds of the memorial and flip it around, you can see it matches the small stray grass in the skirt. It's such a small detail that I think this is a very clear slam dunk. Next, let's move down below the skirt and look at the base of the knight. The base of the statue has, in my opinion, a very straightforward explanation. There is, in fact, one statue in the entire area of Fort Raleigh in the Elizabethan Gardens that stands head and shoulders above the rest in terms of prominence and lore, the statue of Virginia Dare. The base of the Dare statue looks very similar to the base of the knight. It's not an exact replica, but little of what Palancar painted was a perfect match. And in the absence of any other explanations offered over the years, I'm giving this one a slam dunk. Now let's pit it into some of the interesting things going on elsewhere in the image, starting with the two skeleton keys hanging from the arms. Some say there are actually three keys, by the way. This is because the key on the left side of the knight, the one hanging from a large circular key ring, has a small ring on the loop just to the right of the key. Now, this sort of detail is barely perceptible in the best images we have of this painting, and certainly would have been nearly impossible for someone with the book to make it out in any detail. So, if there is a third key, I'm going to assume it's not important. Sorry for that bad pun, but a key question people ask is, why are there two keys? I believe this has a very simple answer. There are two keys because there are two gates at the Elizabethan Gardens. The Great Gate, located at the bottom right of the map here, and the Water Gate, located at the northern end of the beach. These are not just small gates on the property, rather, these are key features of the gardens itself. Enough so to be highlighted on many park maps over the years. Here you can see a picture of the big and beautiful Great Gate, which I believe was restored a few years back. Here is a picture of the infamous Water Gate, also quite impressive. Again, these are not just any gates, and so it makes sense for Preiss and Palancar to highlight them in the painting. I'm giving this a slam dunk. Now, below the key and on the right side of the window are some interesting cracks in the wall, which we'll explore next, specifically this shape here. Now, as you may recall from the poem, a.k.a. verse Aladdin, which is thought to match tube imagery, there's a line that directs the hunter to the land near the window. Well, here we have a shape located right next to the window in the image, and this shape matches exactly the shape of Roanoke Island off the coast of North Carolina. I know there's some of you out there who still believe the cask is located in a different city or even state, but a clue like this really rules that out, especially when combined with all the other clues. This one is a slam dunk. Now, an interesting addition to this clue is that the crack in the wall that marries up at the northern edge of the island matches up perfectly to the exact area on Roanoke where Fort Raleigh and the Elizabethan Gardens are located. This seems to be a really clear clue that we need to be looking in this part of the island for the cask. To the right of the outline of Roanoke is another set of cracks, which we'll look at next. If you look at these cracks and turn them 90 degrees, they resemble an outline of the state of North Carolina. Now, it's not a perfect match. The actual eastern side of North Carolina dips down while the image doesn't. But still, there's enough here, I think, to rate this one as an educated guess. Now, under the right arm between the window and the outline of Roanoke hang two bells. Now, some say there are three bells in the image. Usually, this is in reference to an object hanging from a string under a left arm. We'll discuss that one shortly, and in my view, it's not a bell. So here we'll just focus on these two bells. I believe the bells are a shout out to Albert Skipper Bell, one of the principal architects of the area around Fort Raleigh. There's a plaque dedicated to his many contributions located on the site. The key thing about Albert Bell is that he contributed to both the Elizabethan Gardens and the Waterside Theater. This is made clear on a plaque, which clearly points to both of his contributions. So I think this is the reason why Palancar and Price included two dolls, not just one. For this reason, I get it a slam dunk. Now, the real mystery with these bells is what exactly is hanging from them. I used to think this one was a tea bag in reference to the English colonists, but I was wrong. As it turns out, modern looking tea bags weren't actually invented until the early 1900s. It turns out there's a much better explanation for the shape under the bell, and that's the Wright Brothers Memorial Monument. Here I've situated the monument, which is in the shape of a wing, to match the shape under the bell in the painting, and it's really a dead ringer. So I give this one a slam dunk. So what's hanging under the other bell? It looks a bit like a heart to me, but it took me a while to find something in the area that has hearts. And here it is, the Great Gate. We mentioned this gate earlier when discussing the skeleton keys. If you'd buy my explanation of a heart and then you look at the decorative shape of the Great Gate, you can clearly see that it contains hearts. It's a bit of a guess that this is a heart, but if it is, this seems like a reasonable explanation. But it's not perfect, so I'm just rating this one as an educated guess. One other note about the bells before we move on, there is an island very close to Roanoke called Bells Island. I love that Palancar painted the bells right next to the outline of Roanoke, as this would give double meaning to having multiple bells in the painting. Next, we'll move over to the right, to the watch, which is hanging from the right arm of the knight. Now, from the litany of the jewels in the book, we know that there are certain symbols that correspond to the different immigration groups. Each painting has a birth flower, a gem, and a moth. For the fairies of England, which is clearly the focus of this image and verse combination, they are the month of January, the time of 1 o'clock, which is visible on the watch, the carnation, and the garnet. Hence, each of these is represented in the image. Now, moving down a bit from the watch, we have this interesting shape. This curved figure in the wall has a really straightforward match, in my opinion. If you visit the Wright Brothers Memorial, you will find the first flight path marker. It's a big stone with a plaque on it. This marker looks exactly like the crack in the wall, complete with the little box where the plaque would be. I rate this one a slam dunk. Now, moving to the left side of the pedestal is the fairy holding the bottle. This fairy is a really prominent part of the painting. The fairy has also elicited quite a few theories over the years by many people. The weird shape of her back, the negative space under her legs. Some believe she's pregnant and have launched entire theories based on that. Now, in my opinion, the fairy is a depiction of the statue called The Bubble by Harriet Frischmuth. I'm going to come back to this one in a later video because there are some interesting things here, but at a minimum, it's easy to see the clear resemblance between the two. The arch in the back, the placement of the legs, the extension of the arms, and the fact that the fairy in the painting is carrying a bubble is a really key detail that really ties these two together. Slightly to the left of the fairy is a message scribbled on the wall, what appears to be the number 4 in a lowercase t. Now, I believe this is a ridus for the word fort, for a T, fort. Now, we know that Byron was very enamored with riduses. Milwaukee has a ridus, for example, and the word Boston was spelled out in the Boston painting. I'm putting this one in the category of an educated guess, but the Fort Raleigh ridus is the best explanation I've heard so far. Now, that said, some have felt that the lowercase t is actually a cross, as depicted in the West Colony play, and some have argued that it represents a ship's mast, which is also used in the play as a prop to represent merchant vessels coming and going. But again, I like the ridus explanation best. Next, we'll move down directly south of the ferry to the ground. Here, you can make out what appears to be a plumb bob, the sort of period appropriate tool that settlers of the Roanoke colony would have used for construction purposes. And it's interesting to note that right around the time the cast was buried, the Elizabethan Gardens commissioned a team to build a gazebo using only period appropriate resources, tools, and techniques. Byron would have likely been aware of this when visiting the area in the early 1980s. You can even see an outline of the gazebo in the brickwork on the floor under the plumb bob. Now, some believe that this is a clue pointing to the set stage at the waterside theater, which looks a bit like this shape, but I think it's meant to represent the gazebo. So let's keep going and look next to the crackened wall right above the knight's podium. When you flip this one around, you can see a distinct shape come into view. The shape is a really good match for the Virginia Dare Monument, pictured on the right. This monument is within Fort Raleigh, located along the path that takes you over to the Elizabethan Gardens and the visitor's side. This is not the same as a Virginia Dare statue, that's within the gardens. Okay, next we're going to go back to the right side of the knight and examine the infamous spoon hanging from a string. On top of the spoon, you can see a small circular shaped object. And below that, and a little to the right, is a large circular shape. And here you can see what seems like a really solid explanation for this image. Pier Pad Road, located where? Roanoke Island, of course, right near the Elizabethan Gardens and Fort Raleigh. Here you can see it colored in with yellow to make it more prominent. Now, we don't know for sure that it's a P resting on the spoon, but it's a really good guess. Right near Roanoke is a place called P Island, which would make this one a double clue. The pad from the painting is a reference to a cactus pad, which helps you associate the spoon and P to the name of the road in question. I think this one is a slam dunk. Next, we're going to look at more hidden messages in the cracks of the wall. If you look close just above the spoon and the P, you can make out the numbers 36 and 75. There is some chance the numbers are 35 and 75 instead of 36 and 75. But either way, if you interpret these as coordinates, they take you directly to Manteo on Roanoke Island in North Carolina. This is another one of those clues that really makes it very difficult for anyone trying to make the case that the cask is buried in a different city. Below the numbers in the wall is a set of cracks that looks a bit like a pyramid. Some have floated that these cracks are meant to resemble the earthen fort at Fort Raleigh. For those of you who don't know, researchers discovered the remains of an earthen fort at Fort Raleigh, and they recreated it so that visitors can visit it and see what it may have looked like many years ago. Others have made the claim that the shape and the breastplate of the knight's armor is a better fit for the outline of the earthen fort. In fact, both could be true. Unfortunately, the shapes aren't a super clean match, so I think this one is possible but speculative. Now let's go up to the stone arch at the top above the knight. Inside the arch, through the window, you can see a circle just above the knight's left shoulder. The circle really stands out. Now, this one appears to be a pretty straightforward reference to the Wright Brothers Memorial, located just across the Sound on the Outer Base. You can see from this aerial map view that the two images are a very close resemblance, so I think this one is a slam dunk. Now, some have also maintained that there is an image of a face in the window too, in what appears to be the water or surf crashing from the side. If you zoom in, I can definitely see a nose there, but otherwise, it's a bit of a reach. If this is a person, however, I would speculate that it's Paul Green. Paul was the author of the Lost Colony drama, which is performed every year on Roanoke Island, and also a Pulitzer Prize winner. His statue is located right inside the Waterside Theater at Fort Raleigh. Okay, next is the arch itself, the stonework framing the window behind the knight. This one, I think, is a pretty clear reference to the stone archway at the entrance to the Elizabethan Gardens. The two are shaped the same, look the same, so yeah, it feels like a slam dunk. Beneath the arch are two columns. The columns run parallel to one another, stretching the length of the painting. A very popular explanation for these columns is the Watergate. Here is a picture of the Watergate from a few years ago. It's in much worse shape today, by the way, but you can still see the large columns. Another explanation, possibly a better one, is the Grand Gate. This gate also features two large columns, though the tops of these columns seem a bit closer to the tops of the columns in the painting. So that's it. Thanks everyone for watching part 3 of the series. We may not have covered all of the shapes and image matches in the painting, but we definitely covered the vast majority in this 3-video series. I'd like to thank the countless contributors who helped figure these out over the last several years, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you found this content useful or interesting, please share and like this video and follow. Thanks.